In this lesson, we're going to finish up animating our title plate as well as retime all of our keyframes so that they match up with what the narrator is saying. Okay, so we're right here where we left off in our last lesson, and I just want to do a really easy just transition for bringing on that an overview piece of text. So all I'm going to do is just fade that on. So just go ahead and select that layer, hit the T key to bring up the opacity property, and we'll just go ahead and set a keyframe at 100, drag that forward, and then with our current time indicator there at the beginning, we'll just take that back down to 0. Now this is probably too slow. That's probably way too much time in between those two frames. But we'll go ahead and just leave it there for now, and we'll retime it in a moment. I also want to animate this line. So what I want to happen is just kind of have the line start out where you can't see it, basically just right here in the middle, and then extend at the same rate on both sides, and then really slow in as it comes out to its full length. So to do that, we're going to use scale. So go ahead and select that layer, and then we'll go ahead and just make sure that's the one that's highlighted on our timeline. Hit the S key to bring up the scale property. And we want to unlock that constrained proportions because I don't want it to get any smaller in its height, only in its length for this. So go ahead and unlock that constraint. And you can see that this first property is what just changes that length. Now if we move this one, you can see how it gets thicker or skinnier. So I'm going to undo that, and we'll go ahead, and we know that this one is at 263.8, so let's just round this out to 264, and that's going to be about the full length that we want. So we'll go ahead and set a keyframe there. So just hit that stopwatch, and we'll pull this forward, and then I'm going to just dial in a 0 for that first value. So go ahead and hit 0, enter, and that's going to basically make it disappear if it's at 0. And then as we pull that out, you can see that continues to expand and get larger over time. So let's figure out what the timing of this needs to look like, and then add a few more keys just to adjust everything. So what I want to do is just kind of move forward to maybe about right here, and we're going to do a RAM preview so that we can hear our narrator's voice and see how we need to retime everything. So I'm going to hit the 0 key on my number pad to start that up.
Let's talk.
So it looks like he doesn't really start talking till right about here. Let's go ahead and open up the audio and waveform for that layer, and you can see that's right about here. So just a little bit before that begins to happen is where I actually want any of these to begin. So I'm just going to grab everything, and we'll pull this forward. Whoops, let me just select everything. Pull this forward on those keys. And so it's going to start right about the time he begins to talk. So I'm going to zoom back out of my timeline, and we'll just pull that forward. And now let's listen to this from just right about there.
Let's talk about the state of our reefs. An overview. Over 1 million.
Okay, so we need to have everything on by the time he finishes saying an overview, but we don't want anything to come on too soon either. So let's go ahead just right here where you can see this is the part that he's saying an overview, and we'll start the transparency of this one to just kind of happen right about there. And if you want to preview audio while you scrub, instead of having to do a random preview, you can hold down Control and scrub at the same time. So I'm holding down Control. You can see that it's a little bit choppy, but it's a great way to be able to just make sure that you're getting your timing right. Okay, so I'm going to move forward here.
Let's talk about the state of our reefs.
Okay, so he says,
let's talk about the state of.
So right here is where he finishes saying the state of, just kind of in that small pause. So let's go up there and find the state of. You can select that layer, hit the U key to look at those keyframes. And it looks like that's pretty close to right on the money, just kind of where we had that before. So the state of, and then he starts saying our reefs right about here. So let's go ahead and select that layer and we'll pull those keyframes forward. And if you want to, it's always a good idea to trim layers that you have this sort of orientation swing down movement, because sometimes you can see that little line right there. So if we had this extended all the way back, we'd be able to see this earlier and it just would look like kind of a weird mistake. So I'm just going to scrub forward.
The state of our reefs. An overview.
Okay, so right about here, as the reefs are coming down, is where I want that line to begin extending. So let's go ahead and scroll down to that. We'll pull that forward a bit. And that looks like really nice timing. Let's just see how many frames that is. I'm just starting on the first frame of the line extending out, and I'm going to hold shift and hit page down. That's 10 frames there. And if I do it again, that's 20. So 20 is actually going to give me just a little bit nicer looking animation, just because it's going to be slower. But what I want to do is add some ease to these keyframes. So I'm going to go ahead and select them both. We'll go up to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. And then if I scrub forward, you can see that that looks just a little bit better. But what if I want it to be even slower at the end of that? I can go into my graph editor to make that a little more extreme. So just with that scale property selected on this layer, I'll go ahead and come up here to graph editor, choose that. And if I just come up here to the top and pull this handle out, it's going to start allowing me to manipulate that. Now, I don't actually want to change the keyframe themselves. So if you had the keyframes both selected, but whenever you switched over to the graph editor, sometimes that can give you unwanted results. So you just want to click off of that and then only select the area that you want to change. So this handle is what I'm wanting to manipulate. And I want to manipulate both of those. So I'm going to grab that and pull both of those straight backwards. And you can see that now it's a lot faster right here as it ascends really rapidly, and then it levels off much more slowly at the end. So if we watch a rain preview of this.
Let's talk about the state of our reefs. An overview. Over 1 million.
That looks great. I'm really happy with the way that that is being introduced. And obviously, just to get out of graph editor mode, you can click that again and you'll just see your timeline again. So this is looking really good. I'm happy with the timing, and really maybe one other thing we might want to add at this point is just a background, because right now we're just working with the black default and just kind of toggling that transparency. So an easy way to do that is just to add a new solid for your background. So I'll just come up here to Layer, New, Solid, and I want to choose a color that's somewhere in this kind of golden range, but really have it a very light color, so it's very close to white. So just something kind of right in there. Go ahead and say okay to that, and then we'll pull this all the way down so that it's only one level above our sound layer, just like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and lock both of those layers for now, just so nothing gets misplaced or dragged out of place, because we've done a really good job just kind of getting this started, getting that kicked off the ground. And if you want to, you can go ahead and turn on motion blur for those layers that we just animated. And if you want to turn on motion blur for all your layers, you can, but if you start experiencing any kind of lag, you may want to turn this off. But I always like to have my motion blur switches on as I work, just because then I don't have to go back through the entire project and check to see if I had it turned on at the end. So sometimes that's just a better thing to do as you work. Up to you. You decide how you want to do that, and it really depends on how fast your computer's moving if you're watching motion blur just as you work. So in this lesson, we retimed everything to match up with our narrator's speech, and we finished off our animation just by adding a slow transparency fade for the words in overview, and we learned how to create a super slow easy ease at the end of that line animation. In our next lesson, we're going to be creating an animation preset for the word the reefs, so that anytime later on we want to have one of those swing animations like this, we can just quickly use that, and we don't have to keep cutting and pasting or copying those keyframes or even doing it by hand over again. So that's going to save you a lot of time. So we'll learn how to do that in our next lesson.